Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Tuesday topic, which is Racial Equity R3 Project Awardees Present. Um, just while people's microphones are coming on and people are joining us here in the room, just a quick plug for next week's event, Creating a Great Conference Presentation presented by Dr. Sherry Goodall. Programming note, we're doing that in an earlier time slot, 12 to 1, to allow everyone time to go get your votes in. Don't forget to vote. And then the week after that, we're going to have white spaces and black faces with Maurice Kottman, the director of Student Center for Multicultural Programming at Drexel. And then week after that, we've got everything you ever wanted to know about how to submit grants and more from our Office of Research, Innovation, and Discovery team. All right, Dr. Clegg, take it away.
Oh, and that's going to be a winner. So I am so proud to be here today. I'm so proud of CNHP, and I can't believe what an amazing group we are about to listen to. So I really just wanted to highlight, showcase, and scream on the mountaintop about these amazing awardees who were able to get these funds. These were Drexel funds. It was a rapid response, specifically focusing on racial and ethnic diversity. And if you go to the next slide, Molly. We are the winners. So what I've highlighted here in yellow, this was a graph that actually Alistair had sent to me because he was so proud of CNHP. So what this is showing is that CNHP submitted almost the most number of grants, but we were awarded the most number of grants. So congratulations to all of you. This just shows that we have the breadth and depth within our college and that you guys have done an amazing job. So who are these awardees? So if you go to the next slide. Oops, right there. So we are going to hear from Sharona Pearl, Ebony White and Arun, Jan Nasser and me, Jessica Chow and Stephanie Ewing, as well as Daryl Brown and Dean Gitlin. And they're not in that necessarily order, and I just recognize that, Darren, sorry about that. But what we're going to do is we're going to hear a little bit about these amazing projects. Each person, each PI from the project will talk a little bit about what they've submitted and maybe where they are so far in their research project. And then we'll give you a few minutes to ask questions. But again, we're extremely proud of these individuals, and I will let them take it away. And I think we start with Ebony, right?
All right, so the project that we submitted and received the grant for is Examining Whiteness, an immersive education program to address racism and racial injustice in education using VR technology. I'm excited to have both Arun working on the project with me as well as Kimberly McClellan. And so they'll be talking a little bit more as well. You can go to the next slide. So just some background on why we submitted this project. So current multiculturalism training really focuses on othering populations or speaking to marginalized populations from an anthropological standpoint. So kind of let's investigate and study and research this group of people to figure out their practices, values, and maybe, not maybe, and historically, it has served to pathologize certain communities. And so what happens is, research has led to educational practices and curriculum, and populations at the margins are often educated on in silos. And so I'll give you an example. In the counseling field, we talk about counseling theories and strategies and approaches. And then typically at the end of the chapter, it'll say, and now if you're working with African Americans, or now if you're working with Native Americans. And so that really continues to other these groups of people and situate them as different from the norm. And so whiteness has often, or it has been situated as the norm, with everyone being judged against. And so then what does that do for whiteness? It makes it visible and invisible. And so for many people of color, whiteness is super visible, but oftentimes what happens for white folks is that they don't see themselves as a part of a group. And so their racial identity is invisible to them. And that has led to many microaggressions, racism and racist practices within various systems, and also racist individual interactions as well. Next slide. And so why are we doing it? So just some background of why I wanted to do this project. As we all know, earlier this year, many people watched that 8 minutes and 46 seconds of the George Floyd murder by a police officer, Derek Chauvin. And a lot of people's attention, as it should have been, was placed on George Floyd and this really, horrible thing that occurred. However, I was mesmerized by the presentation of the officer and the stillness and the nonchalance and cavalierness in his positioning and how he embodied whatever role he was embodying in that time. And so that was the impetus for me wanting to do a project on examining whiteness, because what is it about who Derek Chauvin is that allowed that to happen, and what's going on in our society that sustains it? And so, Kim, if you want to chime in, this project really is to center whiteness, but in a way that it is evaluated and examined.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ebony. Yes, so for the what, so our idea is, just as Dr. White mentioned, is to really drive us out of our real protective status and privilege that we as white faculty have really embellished and lived through. We never get othered. We always look at this idea, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's with each other as faculty members, or just in the world, is that it is everyone else and that it is us, and that the centering of whiteness really is making an invisible race for those of us who enjoy that privilege. And we would like to now challenge that. And that's a difficult thing for people to unpack, right? But living in that privilege and trying to even use things like distance behaviors that Ebony and Arun and I have had many conversations about, whether you try to minimalize a situation, deny it, maybe even hijack a conversation because there is a lot of guilt involved or fragility that you're feeling, that we really need to deconstruct that, take our ideas of privilege and centering of whiteness as the norm, and really focus on what implicitly goes through the classroom and our everyday conversations, and not center everything on what we often attribute as a white value system, whether it be perfectionism, individualism, whatever it is that is really getting in the way of having real conversations where we can form not only an allyship, but also a conspiracy to kind of get these conversations into the forefront.
Absolutely. And so there's a lot of research and a lot of activities and strategies that really focus on explicit bias. So there are things that can be done to get people to change their behavior, but there isn't much that can be done to get people to change how they feel and what they believe. And so one of the strategies that has been shown to move the needle on implicit or challenging implicit bias has been immersion activities or exercises. But we know in the world we live in today, having a face-to-face immersive experience is impossible. And so enter the great Arun, who really has, who showed me this really great VR technology, and him and I really talked about how we could use it in multicultural training. And so how are we doing it? We're developing a training curriculum that's really not for students, it's for faculty, administration, staff to go through to have an understanding of white value system, how it's centered and how it others. And how they use defensive behaviors, to Kim's point. But the other piece of it is Arun, he's going to talk about this now, is using this VR technology to provide an immersive experience. So you can go to the next slide.
Molly, can I get the next slide? Thanks, Ebony and Kim. I'm so happy to work with you too. I think I run a small VR lab at CNHP, and Ebony once visited my lab and saw an experience which gave a very, not just first person, but also a third person's point of view. But the immersion is so realistic that you feel like you're in the space. So technically, we are classifying experiences in this 4 different point of views. One is the first person, like looking through the person's body. The second one is the second person, in which like you might be an observer in a class where something's happening. The third person view is you're not in the scene at all, but you're just witnessing the scene, but up close and personal. And then there's this third person omniscient view, which is like the, we call it the God mode. So you're like, you know, on a drone, you're seeing masses of people move through the city or things like that, and get that feel of like the scale and the presence. So these four experience, we have catered to different scenarios to make use of these specific experiences. One other thing that is recently being used in racial inequality education is also trying to be on another person's skin and trying to feel how they perceive it. And with VR, that becomes a plausible first step towards giving them that personal experience rather than watching it on a 2D screen. You're basically within the world that you're put in. So that is what we're trying to develop. So that's the technology part.
Thank you. And last slide. So if you want to get involved, simply just email me. We would love to have you partake in some of the role plays and some of the acting that's happening that we're developing through the VR lab. And so that's it for our project. Jennifer is next.
Before we move on, do we have any questions or comments for Dr. White, Dr. McClellan, or Arun, Dr. Ramakrishnan? No? Great.
Just had her hands up, I think.
I had one question. I just wondered how you were doing the VR with us all distanced. Are you sending it to our homes or what?
Arun?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we purchased tons of high quality headsets, like the ones that cost like $200, these headsets, but unfortunately we can't ship them out. There's too much cleaning. So we ended up with this smaller, easy to use option. This is something in which you can just slide your phone and watch the experience, but it won't be as good as the other one, but at least it gets you to some point. We recently published a paper with biomed students watching their lab happen in this kind of a headset, and they've been able to observe the teaching materials that we're trying to give. So we have some workarounds, but I hope that by the time we create our VR modules, we'd be able to have people come in and watch it in our space. Hopefully, yeah. Thanks.
Fantastic. All right, Dr. Nasser.
So I'm going to talk today about our project that Dr. Clegg and I are funded to do, called Pathway to Supernova, the Wonder of Why. Next slide, please. Supernova, well, I'll explain that in a minute. First, let's explain, give credit to our team members. This is a project that definitely takes a village, and we were very lucky to collaborate with Ms. Jaya Moen, who is director of the undergraduate research and enrichment programs of the Pannoni Honor College. We have 3 CNHP faculty members who are experienced in working with undergraduates in research and leadership settings, Dr. Bruno, Dr. Quinlan, and Dr. Waite. And we also have Ms. Marisol Rodriguez Mergenthal, who's director of the Louis Stotz Alliance for Minority Participation, which is a National Science Foundation funded project to encourage engagement of minority students in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math research. We have been very lucky to receive additional funding through the Pannoni College and the LSAMP, so that this project can continue next year, since the Drexel funding is only for this year. The demographics of our students to date is we have 9 students. 5 of them are Hispanic, 2 are African American US citizens, 1 is from South Africa, 1 is an American citizen, Native American. 4 of those students are in the basic sciences, biochem and health science. 3 of them are engineers, and 1 is a philosophy and business major. 4 of them are women and 5 of them are men. So I think we've got a broad distribution of student interests. And next slide, please. Excuse me. So what is this project? The Wonder of Why is an innovative education program for underrepresented minority students who are sophomores with GPAs of 2.0 to 3.0. And the program aims to teach the different logical approaches to problem solving and scientific research in the hopes of preparing these students to join a faculty lab and then become part of the Panoni Honor College Supernova program. Two factors converge to help us generate this idea. The current Supernova program has only one underrepresented minority student out of a total of 13 fellows. And in reviewing how the standard undergraduate approach to science education, Deb and I both agreed that it's very heavy on didactic knowledge and really postpones presenting the philosophy of science and logic until doctoral education. The one exception being engineering. And the 3 engineering students in our group, I say would say are much ahead of the other students in how to do problem solving, but they are helping the other students because they always have extra comments and suggestions. So I think in that respect, it's a good mix. So we felt that learning the logic of science and the why do things happen, would help promote a greater interest in participating in research compared to just learning the scientific facts. Next slide, please. So what do we expect to get from this workshop? This is a 10-week workshop with 2 hours of interaction with Deb and I per week. So there are 20 sessions. One of the things we teach through specific exercises is an increase in mental flexibility of thought. We are also making the students, and they seem very engaged in this, generate a question, a hypothesis, and a specific aims written page. And at the end of the 10 weeks, they will be able to go and work with a faculty mentor for the month, for the winter term. Our grant will pay them to work with the faculty mentor. And then in the spring, they will be able to present their research as part of the Panoni College Undergrad Research Conference, and they will be accepted into the Supernova program. In the long term, and we expect to track these students for the next couple of years since they are sophomores. So in the long term, personal benefits of the program will hopefully be that they can think more like a scientist and they can apply our scientific method to various situations. You don't have to be doing trying to solve an unknown to apply logic and method. Organize their thoughts better for problem solving, and also have a sense of how to ask questions in a way that can lead to a solution. And we're hoping that in learning these skills, that they will be able to improve their performance in their science courses and their grade point average. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? As I mentioned, Deb and I meet with the students twice a week in 1-hour sessions. We practice inductive and deductive reasoning by showing the students how to approach problems that they pose. I think it's very important for their engagement that they get to ask the questions so that they're learning how to solve problems that they're interested in solving. We have them also look at the concept of analogies, and we play a lot of analogy games, which helps to create mental flexibility, but we also use exercises that are contained in the book, The Eureka Factor, which is authored by a Drexel psychology professor, John Cunos, and his colleague, Mark Beeman. One of the other goals that we had for the grant was to help the students realize that being a part of research makes you a part of a community of thinkers. And to start to help with this, we have been having visitors come to our 1-hour sessions and talk for maybe 10 or 15 minutes about their work. And we're trying to vary the topics of the specialty area of the visitors and also vary the ethnic background so that the students can see that, you know, even though they are minority students, there are plenty of people who are out there doing research who are also of the same groups that they are. And there are people doing research of all different topics. The other part of the program is that they get to interact with Jaya Moen and learn how to choose a mentor and how to go about finding a research position for themselves for the winter. Next slide, please. So that's it for my presentation. And if, I guess, Darren, are you going to check for questions before I pass it off to Jessica?
Yeah, does anybody have any questions? If questions arise, you can just pop them in the chat and we'll ask them as we go. Great, I don't see any questions.
I have one other request from Jaya Moen. If you are possibly interested in having a paid research student in your laboratory for the winter term, please email Jaya Moen. And she will put you on the list and will help you get one of the students from this workshop. Thank you.
Wonderful. Great, thank you. All right, Dr. Chow.
All right, thank you so much. So yeah, I'll start by just saying, so the co-PI on our project is Dr. Stephanie Ewing, and she is actually teaching right now. And so I will be presenting with a co-I, Dr. Laura Lynch. And also Dr. Stephanie Brooks is a member of our research team, but not here today. So our project, we are going to look at couple and marriage and family therapists' extent of training experiences for race-related stress and racial trauma. We can do the next. So just a little bit of background. I think, this really started, we're a group of therapists and clinicians. And I think, many of us got into academia, as we have discussed, because we want to understand how to best support students. And in best supporting students and training them as therapists, hopefully improve the workforce development and outcomes of families. And so, in discussions that we had as we were conceptualizing this project, we started with this concept of the impact of racism. And so we know, right? So we know that the impact of racism it starts with emotional and mental stress, impacts the body, impacts negative physical outcomes. And I think it's really important to note too that, I think, for this project, it's really great and it's very timely. However, these experiences of racism and the impact have been so long standing. And so I think, we want to acknowledge that and to address that as therapists and clinicians and understand that, this is the long game and this is something that we want to be invested in. And so we want to know how we can better support the training of clinicians to assess and work with individuals and families impacted by race-related stress and racial trauma, whether it's through our education or beyond education into workforce development. We can go to the next slide. So again, our goals of this were really just to get an idea of the landscape of training and how we could improve our clinical training efforts in the field of family therapy, which then would hopefully in turn improve outcomes for families experiencing race-related stress and racial trauma. Okay, and I think the next slide here is just our research questions. And so we really wanted to look at experiences, both content. So if I'm a student and I am in a couple and family therapist training program, what kind of content is available to me, whether it's in classes or in supervision or in clinical internship, where I am getting the support and resources I need. The second research question is really about the learning experiences related to environment. And so do I feel like I can ask questions about race-related stress and racial trauma? Do I feel like I have faculty or supervisors or colleagues or staff that I can go to and talk about my experiences, or talk about my my desire for change or for growth, or to see a new change of course in the education? And then the last research question really revolves around that idea of, do our students go into the field and feel, do they feel prepared? Do they feel like they either have had the training or they know where they could go to get additional training to further help families who are experiencing racism? So thank you. So next I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Lynch, who will talk about kind of, how we're going to try to accomplish this through our methods.
Thank you, Dr. Chow. So for this project, we are going to be collecting our quantitative and qualitative data during the same phase. So this is a mixed method convergent design. We're going to analyze the data separately and then integrate and interpret both the qualitative and quantitative data. So we're going to do this by recruiting 200 participants first to complete assessments. I'll talk a little bit more about those assessments in a minute. And then out of those 200, we will identify participants who endorse the fact that they're currently practicing in the field, but specifically working clinically with individuals and families impacted by racial stress and trauma. And we will follow up with 25 of these participants to have them participate in phone interviews and collect the qualitative portion of the study. And so we'll be recruiting through convenient snowball sampling. So we'll be using online listservs in the marriage and family therapy field, social media, and then specifically department chairs of COAMPT accredited programs, since that's our accrediting body in the marriage and family therapy field. And specifically, we will be asking participants who are graduates of COAMPT accredited programs, either at the master's level or the doctoral level. Next slide. Okay. So our measures will include a demographic questionnaire and then a marriage and family therapy training experience and workforce preparation assessment that's specifically going to look at race-related stress and trauma through courses and content and perceived impact on client outcomes, any additional training or courses that were offered during their graduate experience, satisfaction with those training experiences, and then to the extent to which the participants feel competent and actually prepared to go into the field and work with the families impacted by race-related stress and racial trauma. And then in terms of the environment that they experienced in their graduate programs, we wanted to hear about the level of comfort they found in the classroom, the program, the university, and then their workplace, and the level of safety to discuss concerns and training experiences related to racial stress and trauma, including the accessibility to faculty, to staff, to clinical supervisors in the program and during their internships. So our IRB actually was just approved, so we will be beginning to collect data in a couple of weeks. We anticipate that clinicians who are reporting a higher level of graduate school and clinical training will feel more competent in working with populations impacted by racial stress and trauma. But also we don't expect that many clinicians will have had this specific training, because this is not a domain mandated by COAMF accredited programs. So again, we want to understand what is missing, and then what students or what graduates of these programs wish they had learned, and how that's impacting their work in the field now. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. What an interesting project. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Chow or Dr. Lynch? All right, you can always pop it into the chat if something comes to mind. I see there's a really nice chat exchange happening as people are answering questions over there. That's fantastic. Dr. Gitlin, take it away. Or Dean Gitlin, sorry.
That's okay. Thank
Both
you.
works.
You can call me anything. Yeah. Well, first of all, congratulations to everyone. It really is very exciting. And I assume you already thought about this, but it would be great to do this again when people have data and they can share their findings. So that would be really great to close the circle. So I'm going to just open up working with Dr. Brown from the School of Public Health. He is the principal investigator on the R3 grant, but it extends in very critical ways a project that I, along with Dr. Brown and Dr. Galibas, who used to be part of the medical college, but is no longer there, and Melinda Webster, who is here, and she's our project coordinator, are working on. And this main project is funded by two foundations, the Del Mar Foundation out in California and IBC Foundation. And in working on this, and I'm going to just explain what the model is, and then Dr. Brown will explain exactly what the R3 is. But on working on this, we are asking some health economic questions, which is Dr. Brown's area of expertise. And we realized that the nature of this project that we got funded for will not be able to yield the kind of data that we really want. So this R3 grant allows us to extend what we want to do. So this is called the Good Life Model for Persons Living with Dementia and Care Partners, or caregivers. And this is a partnership with the Global Neurology Institute, with the co-principal investigator being Dr. Galibas, who's a neurologist. And the situation in dementia care is that the prevalence rate is increasing, and that African Americans and Latinos are disproportionately affected by dementia. That's a very important point here. And secondly, traditional care basically means that if you do get a diagnosis, and African American families in particular do not get a diagnosis, if they do get a diagnosis, until very late in the dementia world. If you do get a diagnosis, you may go to the Global Neurology Institute or Penn's Memory Clinic, and you get a diagnosis, and you literally get a diagnosis, and that's it. Your husband has dementia, you have, it may be of a certain type, and see you in 6 months, and we'll regulate some of your meds, which, by the way, do not do anything. And so families are really left caring for the person over the extended period of time of this progressive neurodegenerative disease, which can be up to 20 years. And they do not have access to programs that are evidence-based. So with that as the backdrop, the Good Life Model reflects, I think you can go to the next slide. I hope it's the right slide. It reflects bringing together strategies that I have tested with my teams over many, many years. And it represents a model. Well, what we're going to be doing is training. We're calling people Dementia Ambassadors. And we're embedding this in our education program and training students. And they can come from any background. And they will be trained in approaches to supporting families from a family-centered approach, and different strategies that I and my teams have tested over many years. we call it the Good Life Model. I'm not going to go into the theory base, but it's based in a theory of it's very person and family centric, where we develop approaches to supporting people from a strength-based approach to enable them to have a good life wherever they are at in the disease process. And these, again, given the amount of time we have, I just want to share this is a very strength-based approach. These are the 5, I'll call them core treatment principles that this approach is based on. One of the challenges is that our students, nursing and in all the health professions, are not well trained in patient and family centric approaches in dementia. And then particularly working with diverse families. And by diverse, I mean people from different socioeconomic levels and race and ethnic backgrounds that may have different cultural values than the provider themselves. And dementia is a very complex condition. So we're developing a program now in training. I'm really excited to be working with Renee Chanot-Fatah, who made one of the only films I'm aware of called In Our Right Minds. And it's the first documentary about the impact of dementia on communities of color. And we're developing this training program with a number of faculty, and we want this to be embedded. And the point in our program to give students the experience of knowing these principles in dementia. And then what will happen is that Global Neurology Institute will refer families who agree to have this good life service, if you will, and the Dementia Ambassadors will then work with the families over 6 months, possibly over a year period, to provide disease education support. Now, this is a little long-winded, but just wanted to say that critical to this is looking at health utilization, and Melinda will be collecting health utilization data at intake and then at 3 and 6 months. But that is going to be all based on self-report of calling 911, going to the hospital, using the emergency room, etc., which can yield some really important data. But Dr. Brown is really pushing us to think through, well, we don't have a control group because this is a service evaluation. How should we handle this? I'm sorry, go to the next slide. And so that was the impetus for the R3. And this is just a flow chart where we're providing training to select students who opt into the program, and they will be called Dementia Ambassadors. They will get training in all different ways. There will be a referral from Dr. Glebus's office for families who want to receive a Dementia Ambassador service, the Good Life Model. And there'll be an intake that Melinda will obtain about basic information. The Dementia Ambassador will work with the family. Right now, it's all going to be telephonic, and then we will reevaluate. And so that's all that flow is. And so some of the real hard economic questions, and particularly how dementia differentially affects African Americans in terms of hospitalization and health utilization, really cannot be totally addressed from our design. And so I'm really grateful that Dr. Brown had the wherewithal to apply for this grant. And now I'll turn it over to you, Daryl, to explain how, we can skip this. I can go back if there's any questions about the model, sorry. And we'll just go on to your slides. And so that's the pairing here, okay? So I can answer questions about the model later if there are questions.
Thank you, Dean Gitlin. Let me just say it's a pleasure to be working with the College of Nursing and Health Professions, particularly the Dean, as she reached out to me, I guess, probably a year ago before the closure of Hahnemann. And one of the things that made the work challenging is that the billing trail kind of is lost with the closure of Hahnemann Hospital. So the idea here was to look at what is the, we'll put it this way, often we look at these particular types of studies from the basis of cost effectiveness. but cost effectiveness sometimes doesn't really capture some of those things that aren't quantifiable. So when we're looking at caregivers and ambassadors, these things we have to actually put a dollar value on because they have benefit that transcends what we can put in the, you know, in a bill or a charge. So that's one of the first things. Now, as Dean Gitlin had mentioned, we're thinking about the issue of the racial equity project or seed money. And we thought about, number one, how can we think about getting that data that might be important to take the Good Life study to the next level? And so we thought about bases using representative data like surveys, national health interview surveys, things like that. But we really looked at the issue of pre-COVID and post-COVID, all right? And let me just talk a little bit about the basis of the project here, the secondary project to the Good Life model. So next slide, please. Okay, this is, yeah, this kind of gives you the lay of the land that Dean Gitlin had alluded to. And when we talk about African Americans in dementia and Alzheimer's, we're looking at some really stark facts here. Between 2012 and 2050, only roughly 30 years from now, the African American population is set to explode in terms of Alzheimer's and dementia. In fact, some estimators, economic estimators, characterize that as almost a 200% increase in these patients. All right, so clearly we have a burgeoning crisis on the horizon. All right. Secondly, when we think about those issues that are characteristic many times of African Americans, these issues of hypertension, diabetes, and cardiovascular conditions, these are risk factors for cognitive decline and dementia, which we also see. But thirdly, when we think about, and Dean Gitlin alluded to this, the issue of access to care, I have this fact here that African American dementia patients demonstrate higher rates of unmet need for care, yet experience significantly higher average costs. So I want to characterize the healthcare utilization disparities because I kind of combine health disparity research with applied economics. So this next slide to give you a sense of what we're looking at when we think about disparities between the two populations. So what we have here are data that came from the Medical Expenditure Panel Survey, which is a nationally representative data set that's actually pulled from the respondents to the National Health Interview Survey, a random sample, well, a stratified multi-stage random sample of the National Health Interviews respondents are made to comprise the Medical Expenditure Panel Survey. So one of the issues when we're looking at pre-COVID and post-COVID is how recent can you get post-COVID and then what we'll get for in COVID. So I have here data from 2018, and essentially, you know, the lag time with government data, this only came out last month. So it's really tough to get decent data, but let's take a look at some of the statistics we have here. So my profile is US persons age 70 and older with what the MEPS is calling serious cognitive difficulty. So within that, you're including the range of dementia and perhaps even to Alzheimer's, but it gives you a sense of the severity of the cognitive decline here. So let's look at individuals per household. So how many households have an individual with this serious cognitive difficulty? So if we compare the white population of African Americans, it's twice as many African American households with an individual who are suffering from serious cognitive difficulty. So again, we're looking at, well, what's important here is when you look at raw numbers, they don't actually give you the story. But when you look at per households, per 10,000 households, there's a whole lot more white individuals fitting this profile. But when we look at the numbers pertinent to African American households, is twice as impactful to those particular families. Okay, so that's individuals. Now we're looking at the next one, discharges. So hospital discharges here. And I've made this per 1,000 persons, all right? So in every 1,000 persons within this profile, there's gonna be 40 who've experienced a hospital stay who are white. But that's compared to 60 African-Americans within the same profile also experiencing a hospital stay. Now, one of the things to think about here is that when we think about hospitalization, that is we want to think of it as a last resort, because obviously, as Dr. Gitlin has mentioned, the access to care, particularly access to specialists, is something that's really important. So once that patient gets to testing, then what happens after that? So this is not a good statistic that there are more African Americans experiencing hospital discharges for serious cognitive difficulty. Then we look at ED care. So I have here the frequency of persons with this profile getting either 1 to 4, or I'm sorry, experiencing 1 to 4 ED visits in a given year versus those having none. So we see here that compared to African Americans, white individuals are roughly a third of them actually do get emergency care visits versus 65% that don't. So, and that's compared to African Americans, where 23.1% get a visit frequency within 1 to 4 versus almost 80 that don't. So what we're thinking about here is that we're looking at visits, which often the visit to the ED is many times a source of a referral to a specialist or other care that can address the cognitive decline. Okay, it's so tragic. We're thinking about even what happened last night. We have an individual with severe cognitive issues and didn't get the needed care. Instead, he got shot. But that's commentary, so I'll leave that alone. But anyhow, so this conduit to other care is not being experienced to the same extent amongst African Americans as it is white patients. All right. So the next one gives a bigger clue into that. So we're talking about mean office-based primary care physician or specialist visits. Now these numbers look small. It's only 2 days, but it's still a significant difference between the two populations. So again, another indication that access where needed is not getting to these patients, all right? And then finally, home health days. Now, if you're not getting the care from caregivers, informal caregivers, you're going to be getting some agency care or some Medicare sponsored care for an aide to be in your home. So if we're looking at mean home health days, if you look at, again, white Americans, African Americans, the stark disparity is huge there. And it's also tragic too, even in terms of informal care. This is someone who's not related to you, not getting paid, but you still see a higher disparity between African Americans and white Americans. So this gives us a lay of the land in terms of the utilization. Now, all these things will translate to costs. Now, we do know that the cost for these care events or utilization events is going to accrue more so, obviously, with the African American population. But the key then, too, is if we put it in this model, what is the benefit from seeing the care utilization to what could be avoided through the ambassadors program? So what can we do? How can we intervene to lessen the cost, but not only lessen the cost, but hopefully address the care needs before these patients have to go in the hospital? Okay, so the next slide gives you my hypothesis and what the research here hopes to do or intends to do. So we understand that COVID-19 has created all kinds of stress on patients and caregivers. We know that many patients haven't even gone into care. Number one, because obviously the hospitals had reduced many of those elective procedures, but also patients were just afraid to get COVID. So they reduced their access to care. So our hypothesis is that this COVID-19 will result in lower utilization, but thus exacerbating these existing disparities in health services use. All right, so the idea here is that we want to look at the pre-COVID utilization and then compare it to in COVID, because we're not post-COVID yet. Hopefully we'll get there soon, but we're not post-COVID. So the primary aim being to understand the COVID-19 affected change on health utilization and cost for these persons diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's. That's going to benefit the good life as well as my study, which looks at health disparities. And then a secondary aim, I have it described here, is looking at disease complications and or comorbidities that are reflective of some sort of neuropsychiatric severity. So my idea here is that if we see changes in what these particular individuals are getting care for, that might indicate a greater severity or growing severity that we see now in COVID versus what we saw pre-COVID. That's pretty much the study. And again, I'm so happy to be working with Dean Gitlin, and this is an exciting project.
Thank you, Dr. Brown and Dean Gitlin. We have one more presenter. Does anybody have any quick questions before we move on to our final presenter? All right. You can again pop them into the chat if you have questions. We'll if we have time at the end, we'll try to make sure everybody's questions get answered. Dr. Pearl, take it away.
I'm so sorry that there's the wrong slide title on this. And before I start, and I will be very quick, I want to say, first of all, join Dr. Brown's lead and everybody else's in mourning the death of Walter Wallace Jr. yesterday, as we join the city of Philadelphia and our continued struggle for racial justice and against violence and murder of Black men. I also want to note that today is the 2-year anniversary of the Tree of Life synagogue shooting. So there is still a great deal of work to be done in this country, and I'm thrilled that Drexel is supporting this work so enthusiastically. And I want to say I'm new to Drexel, and I am delighted to have found such a warm and supportive home for humanities research here in CNHP. And I'm really grateful to Dr. Clegg and Dean Gitlin for really supporting my work and my perspective, because as you'll see, I'm actually a humanist. I'm a historian. Next slide, please. And I'm really interested in faces and masks. That's what I think about. That's what I talk about. And we're all really talking about and living within the world of masking right now. And we're all trying to query and figure out what it means to be in public with a covered face. Is Zoom public? Are we our most ourselves and in public when our faces are unmasked? Are we most in public when our faces are covered? Is this muddying between public and private as we invite our students into our homes, mediated by a screen, one of the factors and the continued confusion about appropriate behavior on Zoom? These are all things that I think many of us are challenged with right now, but in particular, I'm interested in how, for bodies and people for whom public space has always been fraught and unsafe, how much more so does the mask complicate it? So as many of you might know, historically, public masking was always indexed to being untrustworthy and having something to hide. In the current pandemic, the opposite is true. We think of the mask as pro-social behavior. It's heavily encouraged. In some cases, it's mandated. It's a sign of public health, safety, and protection. Wearing a mask has also become a kind of symbol in and of itself. Masks themselves can contain political messages, but the very mask has become a kind of political message or weapon or symbol about where you belong and with whom you affiliate. So a mask right now is a form of protection, not just to protect the wearer, but to protect others in the community. But for Black men in the US, wearing a mask remains indexed to the violence and crime that's often read into the Black body as part of the racist history and attitudes of this country. Next slide. Now, many US states and a number of countries have laws actually prohibiting the wearing of masks in public. These are the so-called mask laws. And it's quite fascinating. The first ones date back to the middle of the 19th century and have to do with the rent strikes in Albany in upstate New York. And they were instituted to protect the landlords from these strikes and from violence being done against them on the part of masked strikers. In the 20th century, many of the masking laws were used to limit the activities of the Ku Klux Klan, who used masking in their costuming and rituals, making them anonymous for the horrific violence that they enact upon mostly Black people. In the current climate, Even to today, Black men have to think twice about whether it's safe for them to use masks. This project that I'm interested in will explore the differential racial implications for face covering in the US, looking at how Black men are double discriminated against, both for wearing masks and not wearing masks. And there are a number of instances. Rashawn Rai at the University of Maryland in particular has documented these, but there are a number of projects, and I have a number of collaborators exploring this question about Black men being asked to remove their masks on buses, in stores, even after mask mandates have emerged as part of this history of seeing masking as a precursor to crime. So drawing on published narratives, news stories, and interviews, I'm going to look at coping strategies that Black men use to protect themselves while masking in public. And you might be familiar with the expression of whistling Vivaldi. This is a signaling strategy. So many Black men have documented, Black men and women have documented the ways in which they are dealt with suspicion when they're in stores and so on and so forth. So there's this very famous anecdote of whistling Vivaldi to make yourself seem unthreatening. So I've seen this already in my preliminary research about the kinds of masks that people selected earlier in the pandemic, often brightly colored masks, pink masks, masks with smiley faces on them. And it's quite interesting because we see a market change already post the George Floyd protests in which the politicization of the mask extended to actually using the mask as a site of political activism itself. One of my other interests in the project as I continue forward is to consider whether we're seeing an increased tolerance of masking and whether that's extending towards more religious tolerance, in particular for religious rituals around masking. So in Quebec and in France in particular, there's prohibitions against wearing the hijab and niqab. And so there's this irony of a Muslim woman who wears the hijab being unable to enter a hospital where she's wearing her face covered, and whether or not that is also going to change. So those are my key questions. My initial research shows this quite interesting switch between the kinds of masks that people select, and I'm really intrigued to see where it develops. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of our presenters. What a great, fascinating set of research areas.
I couldn't say that any better, Darren. That was amazing. And Sharona just came to us from jury duty, so she snuck out of jury duty just to be here. So that was absolutely stunning. Each one is so incredibly different, but so incredibly powerful. So I echo what Dean Gitlin said, which is, I think it'll be really amazing when we can meet back together and see what data we've been able to accomplish. I encourage all of us to publish all of our findings, so that we can be known for this incredible work that you are all doing. And I just applaud you. It's really, really exciting. So with that, if there are there any other questions? The chat was really, really active. So thank you all for the comments that we received through the chat as well. So
yeah, I'll be sending everybody a quick survey to get a sense of what you thought about today's presentation. Really impressed with how great everybody managed their time. We got 5 really diverse, interesting conversations packed within a very tidy little hour. So yay us.
absolutely. So thank you again for everything, and we will look forward to seeing all of these fabulous results in press and from a presentation. So thank you guys. Have a great night.